welcome to the podcast. This show is entirely dedicated to the wisdom and the stories of people embracing their true and extraordinary nature, of overcoming, breaking through limits, tapping into universal wisdom, and hopefully inspiring you to do the same. Okay, welcome back to Being Extraordinary. So today I'm actually going to share a little bit about my story. And this is happening for a couple of reasons, and I just want to take you a little bit on the background because I actually can't believe how uncomfortable I was to do this. So, first of all, it's been in the background of my mind that I have captured a lot of people's stories on this podcast, but I haven't actually captured my own. And my own story is really a huge part of why I even created this podcast. So it feels natural that this episode eventually had to exist. You've probably caught snippets of my journey, but I'm kind of going to share it here with the absolute intention of showing you that anything that you want is within your reach, and it doesn't matter where you come from or what sort of obstacles you face along the way, which is really the whole entire theme of being extraordinary, right? That you can achieve whatever you set your mind to as long as it comes from your heart. So my journey is a lot of the reason why this podcast exists. I want to capture those stories, and you'll see why once we actually dive into my story. You've probably caught bits and pieces of it, but I do want to just have a little bit of a centralized location of where all those things exist. The other thing that ended up happening is I actually was scheduled to have an interview at this exact moment that I'm recording now, but the person had sort of a family emergency and we had to reschedule. And I said to myself, like, okay, I've been planning to do this episode about myself for so long. I might as well use this time to record it. But as I was about to actually hit record, I kept telling myself all these reasons not to. People don't want to hear this, or, it might seem like self centered or something to this effect. And it really showed me a little bit of my own blind spot because in my thoughts, in my inner dialogue with myself about this episode, it was just a no brainer. It was just easy. You should do it. But when it came down to actually hitting record, I really tried to talk myself out of it. And here we are. We hit record. We're here. And you almost wonder if sometimes those kind of cancellations or whatever ends up happening in your day is really just the push you need to do that thing that maybe you would have put off for a long time. I actually have a few episodes in mind that I want to do, but I keep booking interviews so that I don't have to do them because it feels a little bit vulnerable for me. I've done so much growth, so much change in the last little while. I know that letting a little bit more of my authenticity out is certainly important. And it's the next phase of my journey, but damn, it's pretty scary. There's certain things that I'm comfortable to a degree with sharing. Being an Akashic record reader, talking about the meaning of life, karma, these things still get interesting reviews from people who aren't in this world. But for some reason, that's something I'm okay with facing at this point in my career. Thanks for coming along the journey. Okay, so a little bit about my story and just even why this podcast exists. So I will take you through, how I kind of came to this point, what my life looked like versus what it looks like now. I don't really have any, grand traumatic event necessarily that really triggered it all. It was my Saturn return, not surprisingly, that ended up triggering most of it. But really, the reason I created this podcast is because I did come from really, really humble beginnings, and I felt like such a normal person who grew up in a world that didn't really have a lot of opportunity. I always thought that if you wanted to do something extraordinary with your life, and literally extraordinary as it is defined, which is extraordinary, it's not just, what you're expected to do or how you're expected to live or how society creates boxes for us to live in. And I thought you had to live in those boxes, especially if you came from what I come from and where I come from. It's just someplace that is not the realm of opportunity. It's not the realm of being extraordinary or living outside the box. And I really thought you had to be born in a big metropolis where there's opportunity and arts and culture. You definitely had to come from money and have somebody in your world who can support you on these extraordinary endeavors. And none of those things were really my story. So the reason this podcast exists is to show everybody that we all have infinite potential and we all have this extraordinary gift and storyline within us that's just dying to be birthed if we just would choose it and stop making excuses. So without further ado, let's kind of go a little bit into my journey. So I grew up on a farm near to Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, Canada. And even within the country of Canada, Saskatchewan is kind of known as being one of the lamest provinces. So even within my own country, it is really not the land of opportunity. So I grew up on a farm and my parents were working class people, really paycheck to paycheck, opportunity to opportunity. We didn't play. I mean, I don't think people did this at the time anyway, but we weren't in sports or, things like this. We really grew up close to the earth, just, outside playing, these kinds of things. And so we also never really left the farm. We went to school, of course, but we didn't travel. It was rare that we would even get to come to like the city of PA. So we were super rural kids. And this is all we knew. I think we had a great upbringing. I had a lot of fun out there, but very, very sheltered, very, very small worldview. When I went to school in my particular age category, there was only about 8 kids in my grade at my school. That was relatively small in comparison to other classrooms, but it was so sheltered. At this time as well, this is pre-internet. We had 2 channels, so we didn't really get exposure to that. My parents, not into the news or media, not into politics. I would actually describe my father as a anarchist, and I think he would almost describe himself that way as well. And my mom could care less about these kinds of things, so no exposure in that sense. Very small worldview, and I really didn't know anything about the world until I had started to go to high school. So you'd come to the big city and there was, everybody went to 1 or 2 schools. So there was like a monstrous amount of people at this time. And whatever you get all these crash courses in life, people do drugs, people drink, people watch different types of TV shows, the internet exists, MSN Messenger is a thing. You learn that people have brand name clothing. You learn that also there is, I don't even know what to describe it as. I'm sure it has a word, but I actually have no idea what it is, even to this day. But social norms where it's like you want to signal that you're popular or that you're wealthy. I didn't really know that people drove vehicles. People would spend money on fancy vehicles to show you that you had money. That was even new to me. And then in my kind of social circle, that would be more brand name clothing, and just I was really crash coursed into all of this. And I use cars as an example because my first job was ever working at a gas station. But anyways, I really was kind of shocked. And I remember feeling like I had to catch up. And there were some elements of being a little bit trying to hide the fact that you didn't have MSN Messenger or trying to hide the fact that, your family didn't have is working class. Okay. So my parents weren't about to spend money on a satellite dish for the internet or cable TV. This just wasn't something. So there's kind of a little bit of feeling uncomfortable with the fact that not only are you unaware because you grew up so sheltered and you went to a farm school, which people didn't really have brand name clothing or image there or whatever. And I really had no clue what I wanted to do with my life. I never had this really, I want to do that. I really want to do that. But as I was watching these really mind-boggling experiences from what I was previously witnessing, I just decided I didn't want to play that game. I watched people buy these really expensive cars and they were absolute assholes. Honestly, I don't think there's very many full serve gas stations anymore, but it is a service and I've never been treated so rudely because I also was a server for such a long time. And honestly, people are so shitty to gas attendants. It's unbelievable. The worst insults I've ever heard came from random people getting fuel. I just seen a lot of that there. I seen, people dressed really formal for work, driving Audis, and just being like the most absolutely awful people. And they're signaling to the world that they're better than you and that they're successful, but the energy or the feelings or even the personality that they would express did not exude happiness, right? It was arrogance, it was looking down. And to me, 1 plus 1 should equal 2, but it's really not equaling that. You're clearly better than me, quote unquote, but you're much unhappier. And I was just like, I don't want to be like that. And I remember just, thinking those kinds of things. I don't want to just be in this pursuit of money and gain, but have nothing on the inside that matters, no substance, no truth. So I kind of had made this decision really early on, probably a subconscious decision, that if you had money and wealth and status, that you essentially probably you weren't happy. And I probably also said that to myself because of, my family circumstances and things like this. But anyways, so this is the startup. And I didn't have any really big dream or desire about what I wanted to do after school. So I finished high school and I took some time off because I just didn't have a clue. I wasn't drawn to anything. I remember even going to career counseling and they were told me things in the end, oh, you should be a teacher. And I was like, okay, yeah, I could get it down with that. It'd be all right. But I just couldn't pull the trigger on anything. So then finally, I had decided that I wanted to help people. Again, remember, I'm 19 at this point. I've grown, okay? But I just remember thinking I didn't want to spend my life on this selfish pursuit of anything. I wanted to help people. I wanted to leave the world better than I found it. I think my line that I would say to myself is you either can be a part of the problem or a part of a solution. And I wanted to be a part of a solution. Just stick with me because my perspective changes a little bit over time. But so then I wanted to travel. I had this desire to travel because again, we were very landlocked our whole life. We didn't travel. We didn't see things. So it became this big desire for me to see the world and have new experiences and meet new people because classroom of 8 didn't have any exposure to new people really. And that's what I wanted to explore. And so I wanted to travel, wanted to help people. And I ended up coming up with this decision that I wanted to be a professional humanitarian literally, and take contracts with, other countries to do essentially disaster relief or humanitarian aid. So I literally have a bachelor's degree in disaster and emergency management. And my vision for myself was that I was going to take these contracts and basically go and do humanitarian relief, disaster relief. And I specifically wanted to work with the human side of things, not really like planning and logistics. So I took a 4-year degree of a Bachelor of Arts. It was a tipping scale degree. So you could either go into the science part of it or the arts side of it. Again, embarking on it, I had no idea what I was interested in. So I just waited to see. And how you would tip it is you would just either take more science classes or more arts classes, and it would tip your degree into arts or science. And I ended up really enjoying the arts classes. So I studied disaster and emergency management for 4 years. I minored in sociology. I started with a psych minor. I realized immediately that I did not like it. And I flipped into sociology because I was so fucking curious about the data. I was obsessed with sociology. I could not get enough of it. So many interesting random facts about the study of human behavior. And if it could have been something I could have majored in and done something meaningful with it, I probably would have switched. So that's where it started. And I did 3 years of my degree in Brandon, Manitoba. And I ended up having this amazing opportunity to finish my final year in Colorado. I always load myself up with the challenging things first. So by the time I had gotten to my final year, the only things I needed from my degree were electives. I just needed more credit hours to graduate. So I was able to transfer and go and just have a really great time in Colorado for my final year of university, which ended up leading into this beautiful internship with the city of Colorado Springs working for the fire department. And it was such an incredible experience. And also, it was a paid internship, which is super rare in the US. So I got a paid internship, which was essential because as a Canadian citizen, I couldn't work legally in the US unless it had to do with my education. I still look back very fondly at that time. It was amazing things that I was able to experience. So finished my internship, came back to Canada, and I got the jobs I wanted to. So I ended up working for the Canadian Red Cross. I had done local humanitarian assistance and relief, and I did enjoy it. And then it just was a nonprofit. It didn't pay really great. And then I ended up working at another nonprofit where it was under the government of Canada, and it was supporting newcomers and people. It was actually refugees who I was primarily working with, refugees and asylum seekers who were coming from war-torn countries. And again, very relative to what I was doing. And at that time, it was when the Syria crisis was happening. So most of the people and families and children that I ended up working with were actually from Syria. And to this day, love my experience with that. It taught me so much. I learned about, how to communicate if you don't speak the same language as someone, because everyone spoke Arabic. I definitely didn't. I don't even know how I got that job sometimes, but you really learn how to communicate. I remember learning I worked with children mostly, and I remember learning certain key phrases in Arabic for children. It would be their school, just words, not even phrases. It'd be their school tomorrow, and school's not going to wait for you. So it would be like, hurry up, we'll have to be ready at this time. It was just so much fun. I really did enjoy it. It was a great experience. Why didn't I ever take contracts? Well, I had moved back to my hometown just to save money after university. And I had said this vow to myself. I was like, don't you dare meet a guy and get stuck in this town. You can't meet anyone. And of course, I met someone. So I ended up sticking around a little bit. And, hindsight is 2020, right? I was so mad at myself for that for so long. And now I realize if I wouldn't have met him, I would have moved. And he's still the partner I'm with today. It's been a decade now. And if I wouldn't have met him, I would have proceeded to move to the West. Who even knows what I would have done for work? I probably would not have stuck with what I was trained in, but who knows what I would have done. And I really feel like if I wouldn't have stayed here, I could have easily distracted myself with kind of pretending to be someone I wasn't. And I don't know how long it would have taken me to find the Akashic Records, but I'm pretty sure I would have been distracted and somebody completely different. I think I would have been somebody who was still really engaged with politics, was still really engaged with, the story where people can be born a victim and we got to do everything that we can to support them, which karmically and in the reincarnation scheme isn't true. And I would have just been this bleeding heart who dedicated my life to other people. I would have struggled with definitely compassion fatigue. And I don't know what it would have taken because in those worlds that I was gravitating towards, I think it would have been so normalized. Anyways, then I do this job for a while and I end up just getting the lovely compassion fatigue. And a lot of it wasn't for me what I was doing with the clients. I felt like I really enjoyed the people that I was working with for the most part, but I seen a lot of gaps in this humanitarian sort of service industry, nonprofit. I worked for a huge organization. So I ended up working in like the immigration services, but the organization umbrella, they served a very vulnerable population in the community. Women and children they had a women's shelter, they had homeless shelters. They worked with people that were like newcomers to the city, but from other towns or even just a reservation. They just worked with everybody. And I seen so many gaps. And so, just as a little anecdote to anyone listening to this, it is really easy to say how we should solve these problems and how we should care about people and how we need to give people a leg up. But there's a lot of flaws in the system. Let me tell you that. And one of the biggest flaws that I experienced was that you had to help people, but you couldn't help them too much because you still needed to report on them in order to receive government funding. And you didn't my common sense approach is like, I want to enable everybody I ever work with to never need this place again and to know how to master life in Canada with great ease. But that was not the objective that we were told. We were told that, you still you could help them with this, like without having said it in so many words. It was like, don't, you kind of want to keep them dependent on you. And I just couldn't rationalize that in my mind. And I also saw this one thing and it made me really sad. So I was working with Muslim families for the most part, which great, love it. I don't know if you guys know this, but my brother's Muslim. Converted like I don't even know how many years ago. I have two brothers and a sister. They're all younger than me. I'm the oldest. Yeah, my next brother in line, he converted to Islam like 10 years ago. I'm not sure. And he's married to my sister-in-law from East Africa. And they live in the US. I have a nephew. It's great. So I actually really liked working with the Muslim people. It's just, I love learning about different religions and different beliefs because maybe this is blasphemous, but lots of it is based in truth. It's just all religions have some type of basis in truth. It's just the interference of control that sometimes kind of overcomes everything. But anyways, one of the really sad things that I saw was that these Muslim women would come and they would say things like, "Oh my God, in Canada, women are equal. I am so excited. I'm going to go to school. I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to do all these things. I'm going to drive." All these things that maybe weren't so available to them in their home countries. And to no fault of their own necessarily, once they realized kind of how much money Canada gives out, they kind of gave up on some of those dreams. And that really broke my heart a little bit. And they would say things like, "I'm not having any more kids." They're so young when they got married. They have so many kids. A lot, and don't judge this, because a lot of them actually really loved their husbands, and they like don't make assumptions about what that looked like. It was really, their husbands were great. A lot of them, the men were lovely, especially the people I worked with. They were great. And so it wasn't as awful. They were just excited because culturally and socially, there was so much more opportunity here. So a lot of them said, "I don't want to have any more babies. I want to focus on me." But they saw what the government of Canada offers to people who have a lot of children, and they put a lot of their dreams on the shelf. So I really started to see the fault in the narrative about, kind of that socialism approach. And again, I minored in sociology, and they cram socialism down your throat. You really think that that is the only, you still see it's a flawed system, but you really think it's the only thing we could possibly do. But I was in a very kind of socialist environment, and you learn real quick that it robs you of your spirit a tad, right? These women were so excited to follow their dreams, and some of them did, but a lot of them really fell off the wagon and had more kids, and just they're such hard workers. And I remember literally some of them saying like, Canadian, I actually can't even repeat it, but I'm going to say it. I'm trying to be more vulnerable and authentic, but Canadian government is stupid because they give people so much money. And so they just worked, made a ton of money, but also were like, yeah, like hand it out, And I mean, obviously a lot of them graduated from that eventually sort of system, besides the lots of children and child tax. They have houses now. Some of them have businesses. Incredible. Super proud of all of them. But you see the glitch in the system real quick. And so I started to burn out from compassion fatigue, definitely. There was lots of parts of that. And then I started to also realize like what an endless non-solution environment our whole organization was. And it felt meaningless. There was no real nonprofit, so there wasn't a ton of places to go. And I was so broke, you guys. I made the same salary as everyone else, so broke. Like money was my story. I remember having to roll quarters to pay for gas. I would, sometimes we get invited out for happy hour drinks or whatever. And I just literally didn't even have $40 in my bank account right after payday in order to join them. So I have to make up these excuses. So I was giving a lot to the world, and I did not have anything to show for it. And I followed the path that you're supposed to follow, which was go to school, get a good job, do something thoughtful with your life. And I was just really empty inside. I made a post not that long ago that my alarm would go off in the morning. I knew I was going to a job that really didn't value me. There was a lot of, you could give more time, you could show up for these late night events, you could do this. And it was really, we didn't get paid that well. It was always give more, ask for less. And also, by the way, everything that you're working on is a dead end solution. It was just such a hollow feeling where I loved the people, but at a certain degree, it kind of wears down on you, right? And there wasn't anywhere to go. Like, definitely didn't want to be the manager of one of these divisions. And that was the only financial upgrade I could have taken. And this was what I wanted. This is what I said I was going to do, be a humanitarian. I just didn't even know what else to dream of. Okay. And then all the while in the background of my life, so if we just revert back before all this happened, in the background of my life, there has been this quest or this thought, what's really going on here? I just couldn't make sense of people's choices and experiences, obviously, because of the career that I chose. And then there were just certain things that happen in your life. And I know, and every single one of you has these events. Okay. So don't be like, oh, this stuff doesn't happen to me. I guarantee it happens to you and has happened to you and continues to happen to you. But we don't always register it as meaningful until after the fact. And I am blessed with a ridiculously good memory. I remember being in a car seat, and the one with the cradle, the kind of the handle. I remember things like that. I remember life before my brother was born, and I was 2 years old when he was born. So I have a really great memory. So that is the only asset I'll say I might have over you, is I can remember these weird flagging moments in my life. And so all the while I'm trying to make sense of reality. And when I was in university, they really also beat spirituality out of you. I feel at certain points I had this relationship with who I thought my creator was, and it wasn't really religious or anything. I just remember having these conversations with the divine, you know? And we all, if you have any sort of religious upbringing, I think you think there's a God. And I was baptized Catholic, I guess. And I went to church with my grandma. Actually, I was also an altar server. So I suppose religion was in my life, but church scared me. I did not feel good there. So it wasn't really that. And I wasn't really religious. I just go with my grandma to get away with from my little siblings because I was the oldest and it was a lot of responsibility, etc. But I was always trying to make sense of things. And university really beats left for me anyway. They really, I'm going to say indoctrinate. I was there. They really indoctrinate you with left wing beliefs. And they also really kind of frown down upon anyone who's sort of spiritual or religious. You know, unless they're trying to respecting, you know, we're respecting the differences of someone who is from Islam or someone who is Hindu or whatever. They'll do it out of respect, but they kind of snicker at you if you have a belief and you're from this side of the world kind of thing. And I literally remember walking up to one of my prof's office doors once, and there was this comic that he had posted on the wall, and it was why beer is better than God. And I just remember, and they kind of attach this demolition of your spiritual beliefs in university. They kind of attach it to how intellectual you are. And this is how they convince you to believe these things while you're in university. They say there's no empirical data, there's no peer-reviewed journals about how this could be true. So if you believe it, you're kind of an idiot, essentially. They always value empirical data, the peer-reviewed research, studies, statistics, all these things. And if there's none of that, then it doesn't exist to the academic community. And there's kind of this air of, and for me, I did really university and I did love learning and I felt like this educated intellectual person, and it was soul nourishing to a degree. But then they kind of do indoctrinate you with these beliefs and they attach it to how intelligent you are, which if you're in university, your GPA is important, your grades, you're studying all the time. And so I just let it all go. I let whatever I had go because I was like, yeah, I'm smart. I would never believe in these dumb things. And then at the same time, though, when I was in high school, I had this friend and she said something to me once and I was okay with that too. So it wasn't difficult for me to let go of any sort of belief that I had, which again, it was a fickle belief to begin with. It was unstructured. But anyways, she'd said to me that she'd studied the Jehovah's Witness belief and they only believe 144,000 get to the afterlife and they only pick the most virtuous people. And she said, obviously, it's never going to be me. And I've made my peace with that. If I just go into the ground and decompose, I'm all right with that. And when she said it to me in high school, I was traumatized a little bit. I did not like that. But I just sit with that discomfort, which is also a specialty I have. If something makes me uncomfortable, I'll just sit with it until it's no longer, until I'm like, I get it, or I'm okay with it. And so I just sat with it until I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm okay with that too. The Mother Earth gave to me my whole life. I'll give myself back to her in my death. And I was okay with that. Just black, just it's over. It was nothing, whatever. So by the time I get to university, it's not hard to convince me that there might not be some sort of grand meaning to life. So these are a couple flags in my life. So that's flagged, you know, what's the meaning of life? A couple other flags. The only thing is I was really okay with believing that there was nothing spiritual going on here. I truly was. But the one thing I can never explain away was when I was like between that gap year between high school and university, I lived in this party house. And there was definitely a ghost in that house. And there were just certain things I couldn't explain away. Lots of people have kind of spiritual ghostly experiences. And how can you explain that there isn't something beyond death when there's ghosts, right? So just fun facts is what would happen in this house. The things that had directly happened to me, the ghost was actually, I think, really friendly and nice, but I just remember coming home really late, and to get to my room, you had to walk through the kitchen. So I walked, and it was pitch black. So I walked through the kitchen, and it's all good. I come back out to get a glass of water, and the element on the stove is bright red and on, which there's no way I wouldn't have seen that walking through the first time. And it was just getting hot, and I was like, "What the fuck?" Because it's the middle of the night. So that happened, and then I this is back when you could rent videos, and I was obsessed with Aladdin. So I was an adult renting Aladdin from Blockbuster, and I was like, I better take this DVD back. And I had all my stuff, my keys, whatever, gonna go drop it off. And then I put it on the table. I go to my room, I come back, and it's gone. And it's like gone. I am looking everywhere for this. I have no idea where I set it. And I was like, oh, I guess it's mine now. And then months later, we're cleaning the house, and the on top of the cupboards where there's that space between the ceiling and the cupboard. Well, someone was cleaning up there, which I couldn't reach. It was very far away. I've never been up there, didn't care about that place. Someone was cleaning it, and they're like, whose DVD is this? And it was like the Aladdin DVD that I lost, and nobody was home in that 5-minute interaction when it was gone, when it just disappeared. And I was like, that's so fucking weird. But you just are like, we could kind of just shrug it off. You're like, ah, whatever. But then a couple months later, maybe, I set my cell phone down in the same place on the table where I had set that VHS, or sorry, the DVD. And I came back again, and it was fucking gone. The fuck? Again, there was maybe one other person home, and I was like, did you see it? And whatever. I was like, you know what? This is the 5-minute interaction again. I think my friend was in the kitchen the whole time. She didn't take it. And I was like, if it's on the top of the cupboards, I'm gonna fucking lose it. And so I dragged a chair, climbed on the cupboard, and my cell phone was there. Nobody would have put it there. So that was for me when I started to be like, okay, maybe we shouldn't just be explaining this all away. And it was happening to everybody in the house in different ways. The dog would let itself back in. The TV would consistently always change to the country music channel. The guy loved country music, And so it always changed to the country music channel. And then one time I did, and my friend said that she'd wake up in the middle of the night and somebody would be playing video games, like Gate. I don't know if you guys remember that. I think it was a PlayStation game, would be like fully active and playing, and nobody would be there. And there was one time that, because it was a party house, we're young, okay, there was a lot of high emotions and intensity in that house. And I remember one time there was an argument happening amongst many people. We had this brand new flat screen TV. It was high tech back then. And all of a sudden, the volume just went to max when we got angry, and everybody just stopped and was, okay, that's weird. So, anyways, that always stuck with me. And I think I've said this a few times. I want to talk about this whole incident, but my grandma, who had a horrific life, the worst things you could imagine happening to a human being have happened to that lady. So just paint the picture, and it's probably correct, okay? And so she went through a lot of sexual abuse, a lot of really young pregnancies because of that. Allowed to keep the girls, fresh meat, and boys had to go up for adoption. And she was this very silent, she didn't talk a lot, she didn't laugh a lot. Like, we were close, She loved gardening and flowers. And we're watching this paranormal activity show, and it was just mostly ghost stories. And there's this one story where this UFO flies over a police car, and the police car powers down, and they can't move. And my grandma just dead ass looks at me, and she's like, that happened to me once. Excuse me? What? And I didn't ask enough questions, because at this point I'm young. I don't have thoughts about things like this. I don't know. I'm not sure. So I just like, well, what do you do? And she also, it was kind of a traumatizing story for her. So she kind of skimmed over it, and she said, well, I was like, what did you think was happening? She's like, well, you're so overwhelmed. You don't think anything. And then I was like, did your car turn back on? She's like, yeah. And then it just went away. And then later, because she had died, and by the time I'm starting asking questions again, she's gone. And I tell my mom about this, and she's like, oh yeah, I have parts of that story. My mom and my auntie, yeah, we have parts of that story. And apparently she was on her way to kill herself. She was on her way to commit suicide. And the UFO came down, stopped her car. And I don't know how they spoke to her, but they spoke to her. And they said, like, you have to make a different decision. And until you do, we're not going to turn the car back on. And she just stunned, sat there for a bit, eventually made the decision not to kill herself, and checked herself into a mental institution, and the car turned back on, and she went a different way. And she always did talk about angels a lot. She never talked about God. She never talked about religion or anything. She wasn't very religious, which, I mean, I think her parents were, and I don't think they were really good people. So religion was kind of off for her. But she did believe in the angels. And she said they helped her out twice in her life. And that UFO moment was one of the angel moments. And there was another one, but it doesn't, I don't know about anything extraterrestrial about it, but the other story had something to do with, she was in a bad place with no money, no way out. And some just weird magical man walked in, gave her money to take a bus, and told her to get out of there. And she has no idea where he came from, didn't feel like he was a part of the situation, and that was just her weird interaction. And she said, I just knew he was an angel. So was it an alien? Was it an angel? We don't know, okay? But that was the other one, and I don't have any more data on it. So anyways, back to the original part of the story. I'm dying at work. I'm so broke. I cried every morning my alarm went off, and I'm at the end of my rope. I did everything I thought I was supposed to do, and I just had this thought about my grandma and her alien encounter. So I always said to myself, like, statistically speaking, even if over half or like 75% of people's ghostly encounters are a hoax, that's still statistically significant. Same with the UFO alien stuff. There's still so many random reports of it that even if it, I don't know, like 80% of them were hoaxes, there's still a statistically significant thing going on here. So I was trying to approach it from this academic lens. And I just remember being at my wit's end of sitting at my computer, and I was like, what is the meaning of life? Because I did everything I was supposed to do, and my life is pretty fucking hollow, to be honest. And I don't know what the meaning of this is. And so I Googled, if aliens are real, what do they believe spirituality is? Thinking nothing was ever going to pop up. But my girl, if you guys know me, I love Dolores Cannon. I don't give a fuck if you love her. I don't care if you've heard things about her. I love her. As soon as I die, the first person I'm gonna be like, where is she? Is Dolores Cannon, because she's fucking saved my life by doing what she did. I get emotional every time because if she wouldn't have done it, I don't know if I ever would have got out. And that's also the importance of doing your sacred work, because she fought so many obstacles to get the information out. And if she wouldn't have done it, I just don't know if I ever would have got out of my life. I just don't know. So Dolores Cannon pops up in this Google, and it's her YouTube lectures about, I don't even remember what it was. It was about, I think, the custodians. So there's a book about like who oversees planet Earth that she wrote. And she's talking about these alien abduction stories. And then she ends up talking about the three waves of volunteers. So people from other worlds and other planets who have come to Earth to help Earth. Okay. And so I didn't want the lecture. It wasn't enough for me. I just started checking out books, but I checked out a lot of books. And so, sorry, background. Who's Dolores Cannon? Dolores Cannon is this little old lady from, I think, I don't know if she's from Arkansas, but she lived in Arkansas in the US. And so she was a military wife. She had kids. And her and her husband had learned they learned hypnosis because they wanted to lose weight and quit smoking. And so, she's trying hypnosis for these things. And I think eventually her husband passes away and she decides to kind of go back to hypnosis. And she's like, maybe I can help other people lose weight for some extra cash in my pocket, stop smoking. And she fucking accidentally ends up hypnotizing people into their past lives. And she's not trying to go here. She's probably some type of religious at this time. And she's like, what the fuck's happening? And end up what these people, and this is pre-internet, okay? So that is the really important part for how I bought into it. There's two things she did that really convinced me, because I was a skeptic on everything. So I needed empirical data, okay? I was an academic. So there's two things she did that were very important to me. Yeah. So anyway, she recorded all the sessions as well. Okay. So she just had this recorder. And so she would give it to the person after. Here, you can listen to your own hypnosis. And so she just took it seriously in some of the events. And she's very curious. So she just asked a lot of questions about, what do you see? What are you wearing? What do you eat back then? And all this stuff eventually ended up being verifiable data that she wouldn't have known about. And she just kept doing it because she was open to this new reality. And so two things that she did that helped me believe was that it was before the age of the internet. There was no way she could have known about this stuff because she couldn't just look it up. Like, it wasn't that she was influenced by the internet or she'd heard someone else doing it. It was so authentic because this was pre-age of information. And it was just, to me, that was something statistically significant because this was happening for her I want to say she started in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Just needed it to be at that time period. The other thing that she did was when she she ended up compiling similar things into books. She wanted to write and publish these books, and she would start to see themes. So she'd see people talking about alien abduction stories, people talking about being living lives on other planets before they came to Earth. She would talk about, the reincarnation books, or, the convoluted universe, how the universe is fabricated of really metaphysical high level physics stuff that's very difficult for our brains to comprehend. And she would put them in these books and really wanted to share it. But she couldn't find anyone who would publish her books. So she created her own publishing company, which just adds a little bit of validity to me. But the real thing that she did that I really loved is she didn't really write the books. She would compile meaningful things, and it was the transcript of the person hypnotized. And I really just needed her to do that. I needed her not to tell me the story. I needed to read it for myself, verbatim, what came out of that person's mouth when they were accessing their subconscious. And it was just empirical enough for me to be like, holy shit. And then I started taking out her books, but I was taking out ones that weren't actually helpful for me right away. And anyway, in the meantime, at the same exact moment, because I'm asking questions, I'm going through my Saturn return, I start having weird dreams. And these weird dreams don't really mean anything to me at this point. I started having dreams. I had two dreams that just felt different. I'd never had dreams like this. I'd never been so aware that something was going on beyond just dreaming. So the first one was me getting pulled into this red desert. It was this red desert, and there was this barren, dead tree, and there was nothing else, just red desert and a barren, dead, decrepit tree. And there was this fucking humongous blackbird sitting on it, a crow times 10. And it never spoke to me in so many words, but it said something into my mind. And it said, I want you to look around because this is what you've created. It's a barren wasteland. And this is what you've done with your life right now. And it wasn't that I hadn't done anything meaningful, but I hadn't done anything meaningful for myself. I still had no money. I was depressed. I slept all the time. It was terrible. And I was just like, oh, okay, jerk, you know. And I don't really remember anything else about the dream. It was just this really weird kind of, and I felt like me. I was confused how I ended up there kind of thing. I was like, how am I in this place? And I just woke up and I was like, giant blackbirds, And then I remembered about the Thunderbirds. Okay. So I remembered, oh God, like I forgot about the Thunderbirds. And I just Googled what happens if a Thunderbird comes to you in your dream. And I found this website, and it was from the Lakota Indigenous people. And it was like, if a Thunderbird comes to visit you, it sometimes indicates you have healing abilities, which meant fucking nothing to me at the time. But I was like, oh, neat. That's cool. At least it's a thing. So that always stuck with me. And then I'd have this reoccurring dream, and I would end up on this, it'd be like almost like a dock on this water, this very blue water. And there was a couple rolling hills in the background. And there was me and this other guy there. And honestly, I don't know who this person is. I have no clue. But I wasn't wearing, I don't think either of us were wearing any clothes. And we were both really fucking confused why we were on this dock. There was no one else around. Don't know where this place is. And he kept looking at me, and he was just like, what are we doing here? Do you know where we are? What is this? And I had no fucking idea. And I just was weirded out by the whole situation. I was like, so I was like, I'm not talking to you. I was just creeped out. So I slip into the water, and under the water, I at the time believed I didn't have to breathe. I was like, I don't have to breathe here. Weird. So I could explore the water, and I didn't have to come up for air, which was so cool. And there was hallways kind of, and there was lights, almost like a form of light in the hallways. And I was just like, this is cool. And I had this dream a couple times, and this guy was always there, confused also. And that was the most significant one. And then there was another one, and I remember actually starting to pay attention to what was around me, and there was these purple-ish flowers, and I picked one up, and I'd never seen anything like it. It was like crumpled paper, if I could describe what it looked like. And I was like, what the fuck is and I remember just being like, where am I? What is my brain making up right now? I could have never thought of these things. And anyways, Dolores Cannon, weird dreams. And finally I was like, I'm going to get hypnotized. Fuck it. I'm going to get hypnotized. I found someone in Saskatoon, got hypnotized. And just because it's something you have to be really comfortable in order to succeed at, she spent some time kind of working me into it, and we just talked, and she's like, so what brought you here? And she just asked the right question, because I was never going to bring up these weird dreams, like never. And I was like, guys, I was having weird dreams and I'm not happy. And she's like, tell me about these weird dreams. I told her about the Thunderbird and the desert, and then I told her about this weird place I keep landing. And she knew, because she had been a hypnosis person for a long time. And if you do hypnosis, and you're kind of I don't know, you have this inclination towards extraterrestrial things, you'll just take people to other worlds and other lands. So she already knew that this weird world or place that I was going to was significant. And she's like, let's just explore that. And I didn't care enough to explore it, but I was like, sure. And it sounds so crazy, I'm aware. But lo and behold, in this hypnosis state, she's like, where are you? And I zoomed into Orion's belt, and I was laughing at myself while being hypnotized because I was like, yeah, the only constellation I know, creative, you know? And I was close to the slightly adjacent star, which is named Mintaka. And it was a water world that I used to live in apparently, and it's there in certain dimensions and realities, but it's not there right now. And you have to travel through what I call the Stargate, which I've never heard of. I don't even know what I was talking about. I was hypnotized, okay? I had to travel through the portal or a Stargate, so you couldn't easily see it, but it was there. And yeah, I got to look at what I looked like, and I had littles on my face, and I looked like what you not an alien you'd ever seen before, but I looked like an alien. I was tall, I had webbed feet, webbed hands, I had gills on my face, but they were almost not so bad looking though. It looked like you had a really chiseled jaw and you had gills and just these kind of black, beady, very kind looking eyes, which is also exactly what my spirit guides look like when I met them, which was the first step. So the first step in my hypnosis was to meet my spirit guides. And they look like that. And I, again, wasn't anticipating to see anything like this. And I was just like, she's like, tell me what your guides look like. And they were smiling and like beaming at me with so much love. So they didn't scare me, but I couldn't say out loud what I was looking at because it was so ridiculous to me. And I just stayed silent. And she's like, well, let's move on. And then later, because the last stop in the hypnosis journey was the dream, and that's who I saw. And I was like, holy fucking shit. And I'd never heard of this before. You guys have to realize that this concept is like kind of becoming new age mainstreamy, but at the time it was super, I'd never heard of it. The word starseed or these things were just, I'd never heard them before. I had no idea. I did actually leave that hypnosis session. My thoughts were just like, what the fuck? I thought it was so stupid. I thought I made it up. It was just ridiculous to me. How dumb. The one significant thing that happened in the hypnosis session, though, was the first lifetime I went to. I was wandering around in this downtown area that was kind of vintage. And she's like, can you figure out what city you're in? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. I was like, maybe, but how? And she's like, look for like a street or like a newspaper. And I'd seen a newspaper stand and I went over and I looked at it and I like picked the newspaper up and I was like, Chicago Tribune. I was like, fuck am I doing in Chicago? What a dumb random place to make up. So I just was like, that's stupid, you know? And then she's like, take us to a scene in the past life or take us to a scene that's significant. And I see this fucking ball of fire coming from the sky. And I'm just like, again, obviously, if a ball of fire ever came rain down in the sky from Chicago, we would know about it. And I watched it happen. Then it kind of goes black, but it obviously blows up right where I am because the next moment I'm wrapped in bandages in a hospital bed and my husband is there and I'm essentially dying. I die in that moment. And I just was like, when I came out of the hypnosis, I was like just flabbergasted and thought it was ridiculous. And I just came home. I was like, that's so weird. I don't know what our subconscious are up to, but it's so weird. And I just like rolled it off my probably a couple weeks. And then just one day I was at work bored. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna Google some history about Chicago. And fucking kid you not. Okay, so lots of people do know about the Great Chicago Fire. I did not know about it. And if you look up the official reports about what happened there, it says a cow knocks over a lantern and it blazes the whole town up. But I ended up finding, as I was looking about like fires in Chicago, I ended up finding this article about how they were beginning to believe that the fire was actually caused by a meteor shower. I will literally link that article in the show notes because I fucking kid you not. It exists because there was a string of fires that happened in like the northeast area of the United States all around that same time. And there probably would have been a meteor shower passing through. Could you imagine the shock? Because to me, it felt like a made up event. Like we would know about a meteor shower in Chicago. Could you fucking imagine the shock? And that to me, empirical data that I just uncovered, like to me, I know you guys aren't going to believe it as empirical, but like I could have never made that up. And then I was like, I knew, then you know what year it is. I can't remember. It was like 17. Actually, I have no idea. I can't remember what year it was at this point, but I looked up and I said to myself, if the fucking newspaper in Chicago is called the Chicago Tribune, I'm going to lose it. And I Googled what was the newspaper called in Chicago in this year, the year of the fire. And it was called the Chicago Tribune, which it's no longer called that. It's something else now. And my whole world cracked open at that moment. I was like, what the fuck is going on here? And I also happened to have made the connection. I was like, it's really weird that the lifetime I saw, I died in some type of disaster. And I went to school for disaster management. I did recognize how strange that was. That's a weird parallel. And I guess the rest is history because very shortly after that, I thought to myself, maybe I should be trained in hypnosis because this has been a fucking revelation to me. How could I help other people make sense of their whole entire existence? And I didn't know anything more than this at this time. This is all that's happened to me, but I just was now convinced reincarnation was probably real. And possibly then everything else Dolores Cannon had picked into was real. So I started religiously reading her books and I thought maybe I should be a hypnotherapist. But every time I looked into it, it just didn't go. It just didn't work. There was all these glitches. And then I had seen, actually, in one of Dolores Cannon's books, she writes about the Akashic Records. And I just remember that word really sticking out to me. And I just want to talk about that. And then I swear to God, I'll wrap this episode up. But I'll talk about these familiar things. So it just felt this important word to me. I felt it was this curious word. It was cool. It just stuck out to me. But I didn't think anything of it. I didn't know what they were. And then all around the same time, I seen targeted ad for a book about the Akashic Records. And I just clicked on it, started doing research about it. And then I had probably $1,000 left on my maxed out credit card because I was so broke. I can't stress this enough, how fucking poor I was because it was such a block. Anyway, I probably had $1,000 left on my maxed out credit card and ended up finding a course. I think it was through Hay House because that was the book and I just went through it. And it was my first course into the Akashic Records. I paid for it. And then the rest is history. I was obsessed. And so I kid you not, one of the mentors that I had it was so distant. Knew nothing about me. Started talking about how people can come from other worlds and come to Earth. And I was just like, that was actually what brought me into it because I had kind of an experience that, right? So I was just like, I have to fucking know this. And one of the first fucking places she talked about was a world near to the Mintocket star that has been destroyed and was a water planet. I started believing that I was in Chicago in the Great Chicago Fire era, but this dream, this world, it was just such a background thing. But hypnosis isn't working out, so I'm going to experience past lives through the Akashic Records instead of through hypnosis. Okay, natural bridge. And then the first place she taught us about was a world that I'd actually been to. Could you fucking imagine how convinced you would be some shit is going on out there that we don't know about? And that was it. So then I read a bunch of books. I finished this course. I actually studied under a mentor for a while, and here we are. There's just been sometimes these things that feel weirdly familiar. And you don't feel that it's familiar. It's just a word or a phrase or something that kind of sticks out to you. So things that ironically now that have stuck out to me in my lifetime that ironically now all make sense. When I was in grade 5 science, we started learning about the different planets. So, in the science perspective, in astronomy perspective, I loved the planets. I just couldn't get enough of them. I wanted to learn about the planets all fucking day. And now I talk about the planets in the way that they are teachers for us and guides on planet Earth in Earth School. And it's ancient knowledge that we would have been, probably everyone listening was very well versed in some era or saga of our reincarnation loop, because it's a foundational piece of how Earth works as a karmic reincarnation school. So there's no way we didn't know this. I remember just loving the planets. The Akashic Records, when I read it in that book, really stuck out to me. And then also randomly, the first time I ever heard about Berkeley, I just remember the word Berkeley sticking out to me. And eventually one of the past lives, it probably was my most recent past life, actually. Before this one, I don't know if I was a student or I worked at Berkeley. I was probably a student and then worked at Berkeley. But anyways, I made it my whole personality. I fucking loved being at that school. And it was in the time of the Vietnam War. And so there was a lot of protests. It was a very hot hub. And I was there. And it's just even the ironic, I didn't know anything about it really until I was older, but I was there. And then when I was a kid, I was so afraid that my brothers were going to get drafted to war. And then, as a kid, I didn't even know really about this stuff. And I just remember one time telling my brothers, like, if you ever get drafted, you shouldn't go. Like, are you in my basement? Just don't go, don't go, don't go. And it's like, yeah, because I was at Berkeley deeply protesting the Vietnam War. And a lot of those people were drafted. So, and they came back not well. And anyways, that's my story. That's how we got here. My curiosity continues. I just can't stop. So every day it's like a new level of what the hell's going on here, but in this exciting way, not like this depressed, my life is meaningless way. And I suppose moral of the story is you for sure have things that stick out to you in your memory that you have not been able to either make sense of. It doesn't fit into your perfect worldview of things. So the ghosts, the aliens, whatever. And there are also certainly things that you've naturally been curious or drawn to in your life, the planets, Berkeley, disaster management, and you don't know like why. And it might seem like all the things are not connected at a certain point in your story. But if you just keep on keeping on, everything starts to make sense. And if I was to tell you, everyone has their own path. I can't tell you what your path is if you're trying to break out of something or create a new reality for yourself, but just keep asking the questions and be open to the answers. For me, it's like I was so frustrated at that career and I could have just gotten angry. I could have blamed, I was angry. I could have blamed, um, people. I could have blamed the city. I could have blamed the organization. I could have just like blamed everyone in the whole world for why I wasn't thriving at my career. But instead of just allowing myself to be disgruntled and constantly projecting my anger onto all these external factors of why I couldn't have what I wanted, I eventually had to say, well, what else can I do with my life? What else is out there? What's the meaning of this? And it just ended up leading me down this incredible whirlwind of transformation. So ask questions. Instead of blaming your circumstances, just ask questions and ask what else can be done and how can you change and how can you evolve, because no one will ever come to save you. If anything, the world just crushes down on you harder until you are forced to out of where you just don't belong. And so I feel I was a little bit proactive. I definitely was in a pressure cooker. I knew this couldn't work for me forever. But the world didn't have to force me to leave my job for me to leave my job, which probably eventually would have come if I wouldn't have chosen it, right? But that's how the world works. You're meant to go on your authentic path. But if you just tolerate things that if they aren't working for you, you don't ask questions, you don't just literally follow your curiosity. I swear to God. Just ask the questions, take chances on things that scare you. Obviously, I was terrified to be hypnotized. And as a broke person, I think that there was a sale. I think the session was so cheap. I think it was $130 in probably 2017, which is such a small amount of money for how much hypnosis is really worth. Bless her for existing. Because again, I don't know, I probably didn't really have $130 to do it. But, I took a chance and I would never take that experience back, because without that hypnosis experience, I would have died. Shout out to Hypnotherapy Services by Christine, because without you existing in the world, I don't know if I would be where I am today. Same with Dolores Cannon. Like, honestly, let that be a lesson for why you should step into where you've been, because you don't actually fucking know the transformation that you could have just by stepping into your power and your gift and choosing to go that alternate path. Because Dolores Cannon struggled. I'm sure things were I know a little bit about Christine's story, and I know it wasn't easy for her to make those moves either and confront some of those things. You just do it for the people waiting for you too. Sometimes it's bigger than us, because like, fuck, if those people didn't exist, I could still be floundering. So anyway, that's my story. It's my really long story, but the happy ending is that now I work for myself. I pay all my bills. I actually have a little bit, I have money left to travel, to do things. There's a lot of stress that comes with being self-employed, of course, and it's always a learning curve. But, I just got back from Denver. We go on a hot holiday. Geez, I don't know. I guess it's depending, because we went through a kind of glitch in time. But, there's a lot of things I get to do now that I never thought were possible for me from where I came from. And, I set my schedule. I am able to, go walking every day in nature. I am able to do all these things, this freedom, yet also having more abundance. And it logically doesn't make any sense. So don't try to dollar and cents this, because I'm telling you, it doesn't make any sense. You gotta just do it and let the path reveal itself to you. But anyway, there you have it. Thanks for listening. And We'll see you again in a couple weeks.